Welcome to the TCM Teach podcast, business podcast designed exclusively for acupuncturists and Chinese medicine herbalists who are ready to build thriving, sustainable businesses. I'm Sabey Smith, licensed acupuncturist, herbalist, professor, coach, entrepreneur, and I've spent years helping practitioners just like you not only master their clinical skills, but also safeguard their practices so they can grow with confidence and peace of mind. Today we're diving into a topic that may not feel so glamorous, but it's absolutely essential: insurance, liability, and protecting yourself as a practitioner. The truth is, you've worked hard to build your skills, your reputation, and a practice, or maybe you're just starting to build a practice. And one accident, oversight, or misunderstanding could really put this at risk. So you want to make sure you're protected. So right before we get started, quick little disclaimer. Please remember, I am simply a practitioner here to help you on your journey. The information shared in this podcast is intended for educational and learning purposes only. It should not be taken as professional, legal, or financial advice. For guidance specific to your business, please consult with the appropriate licensed professional. Thank you. All right, so let's get started. So, first thing off today, why protection matters in a healing business. Now, I'm not going to go through this episode to scare you. I just want to make sure you're protected. Everyone has different schools that they're taught at. Everyone has different business skills. So my goal here in this podcast is to do everything that I can to get everyone on the right page to at least get them started, maybe filling in some gaps that they did not have filled in before, or at least reinforcing things that are important that maybe they forgot. So that's why we're here. So some key points here are: patients place deep trust in you. And we know this being practitioners. However, accidents, misunderstandings, and disputes can happen. And we don't want that to be the case. But if it does, we want to make sure we're protected as a result. Protecting yourself protects your patients too, actually, because it ensures continuity of care and professionalism. Think of this as preventative medicine. You wouldn't wait for a major illness before treating an imbalance. The same goes for business protection. You don't want to wait until you're backed up against a wall and in serious trouble. We don't want that to happen. That's not even how we practice medicine. We're not working in an ER, unless you're in China maybe, but we're not working in an ER treating cases that belong in the ER, typically in the West. The key I want you to get here is liability protection is going to give you peace of mind. The idea here is you want to be able to focus on healing and healing people without fear. You just want to make sure that your bases are covered. So that's what we're going to talk about. There are some core types of insurance that every practitioner is going to want to consider, and we're going to break this down a lot in several episodes coming up as well. Really important things that you should know. So malpractice. You probably have this, or if you're just starting out, you're going to want to have this. So malpractice or professional liability insurance. So this is something that covers claims related to patient injury or dissatisfaction with treatment. Basically, if you mess up and they blame you for it, that's where malpractice comes in. It is required by many states, and certain states even have a certain amount that you have to have coverage for to have a license. So states, licensing boards, and credentialing for insurance panels check for this. Excuse me. So this could be things like needle injuries, burns from moxa, which is actually one of the most common, adverse herbal actions. Really check the state, check the insurance, make sure that's covered. You just want to make sure that if you mess up as a practitioner, you're covered. That is why you get malpractice. Sometimes people think it's their LLC that's going to protect them, or if they have a PLLC that's going to protect them. In this type of scenario where you have practiced in a fashion where you messed up, like you burned someone with moxa, or you set their hair on fire cupping, not saying that's going to happen. I'm sure you're better trained than that. But these are the types of things that malpractice covers. LLCs or a business entity are not going to cover you for that. So that's why you want to have malpractice. Sometimes people think if they have an LLC, then it's all in the LLC. But this is protecting you as an individual rather than differentiating business versus personal assets like a business entity. Second type I want to talk about is general liability insurance. So this covers accidents that happen in your office space. They're not directly related to treatment. So the malpractice is really related directly to the treatment, whereas general liability is just going to cover your bases in the office. So for example, if a patient slips on a wet floor in your clinic, they fall, they hurt themselves, you're not the one at fault, but your business is going to want to have general liability insurance to cover something like this in the event they sue you. So this is really important to have because this is where you're going to have coverage through your business having general liability insurance. And then business property and office insurance. So this is going to protect your physical assets, treatment tables, herbs, office equipment, your supplies. This is often required if you're renting a space and landlords might ask for proof of this. Sometimes it's just general liability, malpractice. You just want to pay attention and make sure you have the insurances in place that they're going to request. So don't be surprised if they're going to ask for business property insurance with certain leases. And product liability insurance. So this one is important if you sell herbs, supplements, make your own products, have branded products. This is going to cover adverse reactions or product-related issues. So this is what product liability insurance is. And to be honest, some of these are not all talked about in school. So I want to make sure that I'm thorough when I'm explaining these things, like herbalism and product liability insurance. So there is a differentiation here that you want to think about. You are technically within your scope of practice if you're practicing within your scope within the state. But generally, if you're an herbalist and you're practicing herbalism and you're making individual formulas for a patient, for, say, a decoction or something, that's generally under your license. You might be looking more into product liability insurance if you create something ahead of time, if you have a product that you sell online to other people. This is where product liability insurance comes in. And that is actually going to open things up more for what type of manufacturing process do you have. So we're going to end up talking about all of those things, so don't worry. But if you make a product where you're anticipating a lot of people are going to need it, for example, you can consider product liability insurance. Next is workers' compensation. So this is required if you hire employees. So if you want anyone to work for you, you're going to need workers' comp. This covers staff injuries and protects you from employee-related liability. So you are protecting yourself, you are protecting the business in the event that someone on staff gets injured or whatever on the job. Workers' compensation insurance is very important and required. Next is something that's going to be a little newer, but not that new, is cyber liability insurance. So cyber liability insurance is if you store patient data digitally or use online booking or telehealth. So this has come out a lot more, especially since 2020 with telehealth becoming a lot more popular. EHR systems they've been around for a while. They were around before 2020, obviously, but a lot more acupuncturists are using EHR systems now and using booking online. So what the cyber liability insurance is going to do is it's going to protect against HIPAA violations, data breaches, or hacking. Generally, I would say a lot of practitioners that I have met do not have cyber liability insurance because they rely on their encrypted data through like the EHR, or they have their HIPAA compliant email, things like that. But there is insurance available if you have concern about getting hacked or a data breach or HIPAA violations. So hospitals would definitely consider something like this, or big practices potentially. But you just have to insurance is there, and if you need it, if you anticipate you're going to have a lot of volume where, you're going to potentially run into issues, versus things like workers' compensation. That's just required by law if you have an employee. All right, next, legal liability beyond insurance. So again, just to review, the insurances I talked about are malpractice, so that's your professional liability insurance. Next is your general liability insurance. Then your business property or office insurance, your product liability insurance, your workers' compensation, and cyber liability insurance. Of course, you are not required to have all of these. Generally speaking, most practitioners are going to have malpractice. It's often required. They're generally going to have general liability insurance if they have a business of their own. And workers' compensation is required if they have employees. The other ones, like business property or office insurance, cyber liability insurance, product liability insurance, those are very case by case. If you feel like it might be necessary for you, then you want to weigh those potential risks or benefits to having that insurance. So next is legal liability beyond insurance, like I was saying. So informed consent. You want to clearly outline the risks, benefits, and expectations of what you are doing. Written consent is standard. Everyone should have this. You should have learned this in school when you were practicing in clinic. But verbal reinforcement is also going to build trust. So clearly just outlining the risks, benefits, and expectations. That's your informed consent. Next is scope of practice awareness. You have to know your state laws so that you make sure you're practicing within the scope. If you moved to another state, just because you were able to do something in one state does not mean you're able to do it in the state you're currently in. So you have to check. So you want to know your state laws and don't step into areas outside of your license. The more you go outside of your license, the more liability that is going to be placed upon you. And the last thing you want to do is break the law. So this is going to protect against board complaints and lawsuits. So simply understanding what your scope of practice is going to prevent you from getting in trouble. And you're not always going to report to the acupuncture board either. Some states may not even have an acupuncture board, so you might just be reported automatically to the medical board or Department of Health or something. So just check, it's very state specific. Next is clear documentation. Detailed SOAP notes. Those are some of your best defense. Just take good SOAP notes. If it's not documented, it's as if it didn't happen. Just write it down, write down what happened. This is actually a little tip that I have when working with patients, when I actually want them to go get blood work or imaging or a physical or simply talk to their MD or something. Being in the world of acupuncture, not everyone is open to that. Sometimes the clientele that come in through the door are coming there because they don't want to see the MD, because they don't want to get lab work, even if it's something that I would recommend. So what I always do in that case is I actually write down referred to medical doctor on whatever the date was. Patient says they don't want to go, but I referred something along those lines to say, hey, I told them to do this. In the event something really unfortunate comes about with their diagnosis and they say, hey, you weren't thorough enough. It's like, I actually told you to go to get this tested. And I was even willing to order the tests for you, because in most states, or a lot of states, acupuncturists can do that. So if it's not documented, it's as if it didn't happen. So you want to make sure you cover yourself. The paperwork is covering yourself, and it's helping the patient so you can be up to date on what their latest records were. Next, we have contracts and policies. And you could go crazy with contracts and policies. To be honest, I was even told by an EHR system when I converted from paper to EHR that they said, no one's going to fill this out, it's too long. Well, guess what? They always filled it out. They never complained it was too long, and I gave them the ability to fill everything out on their phone. The EHR system just couldn't handle how thorough I was, I guess. So anyway, things like cancellation policies, payment policies, an employee agreement all reduce liability. Think of them as protective boundaries for your business. cancellation policy. If you have a 24-hour cancellation policy, reinforce it. If you have a 1, 2, 3 strike you're out policy, make sure you write it down. Make sure that people understand what cancellation is, payment policies, and make them sign right under it right after they read it. That's going to be really helpful. If you have an expectation of employees of how they should clean up, or you put them through a training, just have them sign off on the training. I acknowledge that I have been taught this and will carry out these tasks per my agreement. Even if it's even with being at will work, you can still have them be responsible for the things they learned while working for you. It's just having protective boundaries and being clear. There's nothing wrong with being extra clear regarding your business. Okay, next, the TCM lens of protection. You're going to hear me say this a lot. So in TCM, we talk about Wei Qi, being defensive Qi. So just as Wei Qi, we know protects the body from external pathogens, legal and insurance structures are something that protects our practice from the external threats. We don't want the external to become internal, so that you could think of these defenses as like the Wei Qi of your business. So without strong Wei Qi, we have vulnerability. We know this. There's a larger window open for disease. So with it, when our Wei Qi is strong, with these protections in place for our business, strength, resilience, and ease can come about much more simply. So protection isn't fear-based. Do not do this out of fear, thinking that the sky is falling. Don't be Chicken Little. It's about creating the freedom to focus on healing. A lot of acupuncturists don't own businesses because they don't want to deal with the day-to-day business stuff. If you do your due diligence, protect yourself ahead of time, then you get to be that same person who happens to own a business, but just like everyone else, just focuses on your practice. So what are some common practitioner mistakes? Okay, relying only on malpractice insurance, forgetting things like general liability or property coverage. Not saying it's going to be an issue, but it sure would be nice if you were covered if it was an issue. And these policies are not expensive, especially your general liability and malpractice. Those are not going to add up. Oftentimes they can go hand in hand too. Property coverage, that depends what you have to have covered. That's going to be very case by case. Thinking it won't happen to me, that's another mistake. Even the best practitioners face unexpected claims. Now, I even had a teacher a long time ago who was actually sued in the clinic by no fault of their own. And I actually tell my students this a lot too, where in another country, she's actually a medical doctor and got her license in the US, her acupuncture license. And anyway, the patient got acupuncture, everything was fine. The patient stepped off the table, and however, they stepped funny and they fell and they actually broke their ankle. So of course, the practitioner, my teacher, was very attentive, took care of them. Hey, okay, yeah, just want to make sure you're all right. Had very good rapport. They ended up getting sued. And they were very kind, attentive, everything. They ended up getting sued by the person who broke their ankle, which is very obvious. It was most likely due to osteopenia. They were likely suffering from some type of osteoporosis, and they just put weight on their leg, and they landed funny and it broke. No fault of the practitioner. All the patient was doing was getting off the table. The patient actually ended up winning that case. Unfortunately, the patient ended up winning that case. Doesn't sound like it should make sense, but in these events, I can't remember if they blamed malpractice or general liability. I actually think they blamed the malpractice, even though they likely had a pre-existing condition that was undisclosed. They ended up winning. So this is why you want to have these things in place, so that way you don't have to worry about it. So the next thing, not updating coverage as the business grows. So if you're adding employees, if you're selling products, while it is going to likely increase your revenue significantly. You also want to update your coverages as a result. It's simply damage control. You want to be able to freely and easily sell your products, hire employees, just make sure your coverages are up to date as a result of having those things as well. That is very important. Do not overlook those things. Make sure you read the fine print. Assuming all policies cover herbs, supplements, or telehealth, check. Make sure that they're covered. If you've been a practitioner with the same insurance pre-2020, make sure that telehealth is covered, because telehealth, while it existed, was not as common. Now there's more HIPAA laws in place as a result. Please do your due diligence, even with your malpractice, to make sure you're covered. Next, practical steps to protect yourself. Review your current insurance policies. Are there gaps? Where are the gaps? Confirm your malpractice policy covers acupuncture, moxa, cupping, gua sha. You'll likely have tuina, herbs. Just make sure you're covered. If you're renting, ask your landlord what liability coverage is required. Create or update your informed consent form if you have any gaps or it's missing anything. Set up written policies for cancellations, refunds, and patient communication. Sometimes it's very simple to be as black and white as you can be and say, this is my policy, this is how it is. The key is sticking to it. Don't waver from it. Hey, we're friends, can you give me a deal? Even I've done that. That does not go well. I will not do that again. Stick to your policy no matter what. Don't be afraid of losing the patient. It's their fault for not following your policy, and they're the one who signed off on it. Schedule a consultation with an insurance broker familiar with healthcare businesses. That's totally something you could do if that would interest you. I would definitely shop around for insurances before buying one. I've always done that for whether it be general liability, malpractice, and you can check year to year. Sometimes just to get your business, different insurance might try to give you a better deal. Insurance companies there can always be new ones too, so just keep your eyes out. So what's the ripple effect of having this protection? Protecting yourself is going to strengthen your patient trust. You're going to have a lot less stress. So as a result, you're going to give off a lot less. You're going to give off a lot more compassion and healing energy as a result. If they feel like they're in safe hands, they're going to have great treatments, and you're going to have a very clear mind of helping them. Protect your assets. Remember, that means that your insurance can withstand setbacks. Don't get an insurance policy just because it's the cheapest. It might be cheaper because it doesn't cover something. So just make sure. On the flip side, don't get the most expensive thinking that it covers everything and just assuming you're all set. You have to read the fine print. So confidence grows when you know you're covered. You can step into your CEO leadership more fully. If you haven't heard that episode, make sure you go back, stepping in from practitioner to CEO mindset. So I'm going to leave you with this. Insurance and liability may not be the most exciting part of running a practice. We know this. However, this is foundational. Just like building a strong wei qi that protects your body, setting up proper protection for your business safeguards your future, your patients, and your peace of mind. So I've created a resource called the Practitioner Protection Checklist. This is going to walk you through key areas of insurance, liability, and legal safeguards every acupuncturist and herbalist should consider. So you'll find that in the membership. And in our next episode, we'll be diving into licensing and legal considerations for selling herbs and products. So until then, thank you for tuning into the TCM Teach podcast, and we'll see you next time. See you.